Hi, this is Dr. Nikki Deering with Vitality Chiropractic, and today we're going to be talking about archetypes in your health. So let's get right on into it. So you may be wondering, what are archetypes? And that's a great question. Archetypes are patterns of power that influence how we show up in the world. So famous Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called them patterns of instinctual behavior. And these are patterns in our psyche that influence our emotional, mental, and spiritual growth. Now, a couple things to note about archetypes. The first is archetypes are neutral. So if you're already familiar with archetypes, you'll know that there's a couple different names of archetypes that can be a little off-putting. So whether you look at them as positive or negative, the truth is at some point in your life, if it's part of your archetypal wheel, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit, they serve you a purpose at some point. So the reality is, don't judge a book by its cover. There are no good or bad archetypes. They just are. Every single one of them serves a purpose. The second is archetypes are impersonal, yet personal at the same time. So let's look at the example there being the mother. So the mother archetype is extremely impersonal, meaning there's mothers all over this world. However, if you look at the patterns, beliefs, habits, you'll find some common characteristics in that mother archetype, which is what makes it an archetype. It's impersonal, though, because it doesn't pertain to any one person in particular. And in fact, it's impersonal in the way that you don't have to be a biological mother to have the mother archetype. And in fact, you don't even have to be female because it's more embodying those habits, patterns, beliefs. So anybody who's nurturing, caring, loving, or on the opposite end of that, controlling or domineering, because those are all aspects of mother, can claim the mother archetype. It only becomes personal when it becomes part of your core 12. And again, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. The last thing with archetypes is each has a shadow and a light aspect to it. And that's going to be mostly the focus of what we're talking about today, because it's the shadow aspect of these archetypes that has the biggest impact on our health and our well-being. So to better explain that, we need to kind of take a step away from archetypes and talk about the polyvagal theory. So, disclaimer, this is a lot of information about the polyvagal theory, and I'm going to be giving you cliff notes on a cliff note type of thing. If you want to learn more or have this explained slower and a little bit clearer, click the link and you'll find our video on heart rate variability explained, where we get more into polyvagal theory, how that affects your heart rate variability, and in turn affects your health. For the sake of today's talk, what I want you to know about polyvagal theory is it's the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, who is a neuroscientist and a psychologist. And what his theory proposes is that it's the stresses in life, and to a bigger degree, how we've been conditioned to deal with those stresses, that cause changes in how our body functions and ultimately affects our health. Not only does it affect the way our body functions and our health, but it also impacts how well we're able to connect with other people. And this becomes really vital when we talk about the shadow aspect. So there are three organizing principles that make up the polyvagal theory. The first is co-regulation. So co-regulation is where we learn all those coping mechanisms for the stresses in life. So it's kind of like an inherited suitcase of ways to cope and handle all the different stresses in life. And all of this information is inherited from the people that are around us when we're very young, that help us manage those emotions, but also everybody who ever influenced them. So we gather up all this information on how to cope with the stresses in life. That's used by the second organizing principle of polyvagal, and that's neuroception. So neuroception is your brain taking all those coping mechanisms and then constantly scanning your environment, both internally and externally, without your awareness, to determine where you're safe and where you're in danger. So for the sake of polyvagal theory, safe means predictable and unchanging. So what your brain wants is you to stay small and safe and the same. So it likes predictability. It likes knowing what the next step is. And that's why anything new in life, whether it's a good stress or a bad stress, is stress. Like starting a new job, starting a new relationship. All of that gets read by neuroception is danger, danger, because it's something new for you. It can also pick up real dangers. It can also pick up things that aren't necessarily danger. But either way, that's what's happening. And so your brain's constantly scanning based off of what you were told and taught, is ways to handle the stresses of the world, and it's going to react appropriately. That appropriate reaction is what the autonomic hierarchy is all about. And this is talking about how your body responds to those stresses that are picked up from your brain. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. Back to archetypes. So according to the work of Carolyn Mace, which most all of this information about archetypes comes from her work, we each have 12 archetypes that help support us and navigate us through life. That is a whole other talk for another day, and most likely a video I will be working on soon. But what I want to focus on today is within those 12, there are 4 archetypes that we all have in common. Because we all have them in common, they're often referred to as the universal archetypes or the survival archetypes. And again, these are the ones, so all 12 are going to respond to that neuroception. These 4 are the ones that are really focused in on helping us navigate through life. So the job of those survival archetypes is to keep us safe and predictable. So if you think of that whole wheel as a tree, those 4 universal or survival archetypes are what form the trunk of the tree. And the reason for that is these 4 archetypes are the greatest challenge to our soul. They're the forces through which we develop self-esteem, and they test us and strengthen us. And when we don't stand up to these archetypes, so when we choose to live in the shadow of these archetypes instead of in the strength and in the light of these archetypes, we're going to continue to sell our soul, our life force, our energy in order to fit in, to survive, to stay safe and small. So another way to look at that would be using a bucket analogy. So imagine this bucket represents your health, and all the water inside is your energy, your vitality, your life force. When we compromise ourselves for the sake of safety, so playing small, allowing ourselves to be a victim to others or ourselves, giving up our power for security, whether that's a job, a relationship, sabotaging ourselves, things like procrastination, over worrying, over focusing, perfectionism, all these things that seem like they're doing something, but they keep us still. These are different shadow aspects that all impact our health. And so what happens is when we're in that shadow, it's almost like somebody coming and poking holes in that bucket. And what happens is our vital energy, our life force, to use Carolyn's words, hemorrhages out. That's where we start losing our energy. So think about if you've ever been in a job that just wears you down. By the time you get home, you're tired, you're cranky, you just don't have any energy. Imagine a life day after day of just feeling that drained. After a while, it impacts your health. In fact, this right here is the reason why it depends on what site you find when you're Googling. But I found anywhere upwards of 75 to 90% of all disease, stress is a known risk factor for it. And that's the reason right here. So what happens is you can only refill your bucket by filling it from within. So finding energy, finding peace within yourself. The other way to do it is to take energy from other people. It's a lot easier and more sustainable to create your own energy from within, which you do that by becoming aware of the shadow archetypes or the shadow aspect of these archetypes and making them your allies. Because otherwise, you're going to have to siphon that energy from other people, and that becomes very tedious, and it's a job that never ends. Again, the way to patch these holes is to become aware of how the shadows manifest in your life, and again, to make that shadow your ally. So remember, we said there are 3 organizing principles to the polyvagal theory. We have the co-regulation, so how we learn to manage the stresses in our life, neuroception, which makes us alert to where these stresses are coming from, and then the last one is the autonomic hierarchy. So again, if you haven't watched the video on polyvagal theory, I urge you, go back, find that link, click on it, because this will clear that up wonderfully for you and give you a lot more information. For the sake of this short little video, this is looking at your autonomic nervous system. So that's the part of your nervous system that takes care of systems of your body automatically. It's looking at that as a ladder. And this comes from the work of Deb Dana, who I believe is also a psychologist. And so you see the guy up on the top? That's where we're all striving to be. Because when we're there, we're better connected with ourselves, we're connected with others. In the words of archetypes, this is where we're in the light of our archetype. We're aware of our motivations for doing things. We're able to question why we do the things that we do, and we're able to better protect our power. We move down that ladder into fight or flight or freeze or fawn whenever neuroception alerts us there's something that may be dangerous to us, or where, again, wants to keep us safe, small, and predictable. And so you'll see off to the side in the different colors, red for fight or flight, blue for freeze or fawn, the different emotions that go with these states. And so there's different but different physiological changes. So physical changes in your body. So with fight or flight, we're more anxious, on edge. This is where we tend to have more problems with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, reflux and ulcers, that kind of thing. Freeze or fawn is more everything's slowed down. So the medical issues that come with freeze or fawn often fall under the umbrella of what's called medically unexplained. So the medical issues that have no lab work, no x-ray to diagnose, it's just, it's nothing else, so it must be this. Under that umbrella falls things like migraines, POTS, chronic fatigue, migraines, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, just to name a few. So very real diseases that just don't have any measurable parts to them. But again, you'll see all of these emotional qualities that go with them as well. If we look at our survival archetypes and how they manifest in the shadow, it's almost identical. And the reason that I didn't write all those out clearly, like as far as which archetype, which shadow, there's a lot of overlap. But if you look at some of these, a lot of, like, especially in the freeze or fawn, it's working where you're doing stuff, but it keeps you small, it keeps you safe. Every single one of these, that's what they're doing, is it just keeps you in a point where you're just not moving forward. And so again, becoming aware at how these show up, it's your ally. Knowing how the shadow shows up is your biggest ally in this, because it allows you then to really question why you do the things that you do and how, like, what situations in life draw this out of you. So if you would like to learn more about archetypes or are interested in archetypal consulting, please give us a call on Facebook, check out our website. Any questions, concerns, anything like that, leave them in the comments. And be sure to follow us on here as well as we keep putting out more information. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you.